Super, everyone. So thank you for joining me again. My name is Cara. I can see some familiar faces again. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Ahmed, Carly. I can see Pepe. There's quite a few familiar faces. So for those of you who have just joined us, or this is your first time with our webinars, my name is Cara Doherty and I am an academic consultant here at Global Language Training. I will start off our webinar today, and then James will take over a little bit later on and continue the second half. As you all know, our webinar today is on to say or not to say. Now, I do have a skull here beside me, but that's about as far as me and my Shakespeare go, I'm afraid. But if anybody else has some lovely Shakespeare tips that they'd like to chime in with at the very end, you're more than welcome, and I'll hold up my lovely prop here for you too. So I am just going to share my screen with you guys, and then we will jump straight into today's event. Like I said then, today's webinar is on to say or not to say. So what exactly do we mean by this, right? It's a bit of a curious title, I suppose. And I think the reason why we're looking at this is because it kind of encompasses, as a teacher, all of these different things that we really, really have to think about. And sometimes what we are saying and what we are doing, or what we are not saying and what we are not doing, are equally as important. So when we're talking about things to do or things not to do, things to say, things not to say, maybe you guys think this is a bit obvious, right? Surely we know. We know what the obvious things are to do and say in a classroom environment. So let's go through them quickly. Things we should do, things we should say. This is very general regarding of the industry that you're in, right? When we're in a working environment, it's obvious we should try and be as professional as possible. We want to have a welcoming smile or attitude for our students when they join us in class. We want to be cleanly presented. Okay, doesn't mean you have to be fully dressed. Trust me, I know a lot of us have gotten used to being online and maybe having our pajama bottoms on the bottom half. That's absolutely fine. But just be aware, sometimes as a teacher, you may have to do a little bit of movement or a little bit of TPR. So you may have to stand up and move about. So just keep this in mind. Things then, you know, we want to have headset if we're online. We want to have good internet connection. Make sure that there isn't a lot of background noise. We want to make sure we have a nice presented background. All of these things that we're thinking are, you know, what makes us better as a teacher. What are the obvious things that we should be doing in this learning environment, and indeed in any professional environment. Similarly then, when we have things that we shouldn't do or shouldn't say, these are going to be the opposites to everything I just mentioned, right? So, you know, we shouldn't really be drinking or eating in class, using our mobile phones. You know, we've spoken before on previous webinars about mirrored energy. So if you are enthusiastic, if you are friendly, if you are welcoming to your students, then you would expect for them to have the same enthusiasm and to be polite and to be happy as well. If you students log on and you're really sleepy or not really paying attention, maybe I'm drinking a cup of tea, having a relax, I'll have some water, I'll have a nap maybe while I'm here, just, you know, not very professional, and you can't expect your students to be fully involved in your class, give you 100% attention if you're not going to do the same, right? So these are kind of all of the obvious things that we should think about of what we should and shouldn't do or should and shouldn't say. And of course, you'll come across these and many different versions of these when you look into teaching, both in a classroom and online. So following on from this then, when we're talking about to say or not to say, in today's webinar, we're kind of going to break it into two separate areas. The first one is going to be just in terms of general things. And then we're going to look more at kind of taboo topics or sensitive issues and things that we should be aware of. So I'm going to start off and I'm just going to talk about things in general that maybe they aren't so obvious when we're thinking about things that we should or shouldn't say in class. And then James will take over and go through some tips about when we're looking at sensitive or taboo issues and topics within our classroom. So let's take a look then. Okay, so when we're thinking of things not to say in the classroom or things that we are saying in the classroom, the first thing I thought of was avoiding word vomit. What do I mean by this? And I think the best way for me to explain this would probably be to demonstrate this. So I learned this in my very early stages of teaching. And this would typically be for lower level students, not so much younger age student, just lower level students. And when we're talking about word vomit as a teacher, all I'm really talking about is think of the volume of language that you're using in your class in relation to the level of your student. How many sentences are we using? How long are they? How many connective sentences are we using? Do you really need them? So this is something to think about. And the way I'm going to demonstrate this is to teach you guys two words in Chinese. So I don't know how many of you speak multiple languages or a second language. And for those of you who have learned another language, I think this will be a little bit easier to grasp and to understand. So let's say, for example, you are a lower level student. I am your teacher. I come into class, okay, and I'm going to demonstrate today very simply with the two colors. We're going to do red and we're going to do black. Okay, both are going to be to the same level. In the first one, what I am going to do is I'm going to introduce myself as a teacher, introduce the topic. We will practice saying the words a few times. I'll give some feedback, and then we'll move on to the next color. So let's do that first, okay? 大家好，大家好，你好，你好，非常好，你好。很棒，很棒！我是卡尔，卡尔老师。你好，哇，非常好，非常好。好的，今天我们学了什么？跟你说，给你看。这是什么？你们知道吗？是黑色。跟老师说，黑色。非常棒，非常棒。黑色。很厉害啊。下一个呢？下一个。这是什么颜色的？你们知道吗？知道了吗？这个是红色。再来一次啊，红色，红色。非常棒，挺好的。Okay, so today we did two words. We did red, we did black. How many sentences did I say? How many words did I use? How many of you understood just the two words I was trying to teach? Now let's try that again. 你好， 你好。黑色，黑色。Very good，非常好。黑色，非常好。红色，红色。Very good，红色，非常好。Here we can see I am teaching still the same two colors, but I have cut out all of my transition sentences. So even if I'm giving feedback to a lower level student, instead of saying, wow, very good, that's good English, I can just say, oh, very good. Similarly, instead of saying, okay, great, this is a black, let's do the next color. I didn't use any English, just swap. So these are things that we need to think about when we're dealing with different levels of students. The lower level your student is, the less you should be speaking, the shorter your sentences should be, and the less transitions in general you should be saying out loud. Following on from that then, when we're talking about parroting, this is also to help us reduce our teacher talk time. So this is more in terms of repeating back what your student says to you. So if we have a lower level students, then of course we are going to have a lot of repetition back and forth. However, if we have older students, sometimes as a teacher, we may find that we will parrot back or repeat back the sentence that the student has said to us. So if the student has made a grammatical mistake or has some pronunciation errors, then of course we should repeat the sentence back so that the student can understand the corrections. However, if the student has good pronunciation, they are speaking in a fluid movement, then instead of repeating what they say, we should just have some short interjections at the very bottom. So for example, let me go back. So for example, I may ask my student, what did you do today? The student says, today I played basketball and did my homework. As a teacher, I can say, wow, today you played basketball and did your homework. That's great. There was no need for me to use or to repeat back his first sentence. It's increased my teacher talking time, and he may lose interest. There's just a lot of English to comprehend. So rather, the better form would be to just interject a small word at the end. What did you do today? Today I played basketball and I did my homework. Very interesting. So this gives the student more time to think and more time to add something on and to expand in their answer as well as reducing our talk time as a teacher. Following on from that then, something else that we have to be aware of as a teacher is not to fear silence. So we don't want to always parrot back to our students. We don't want to repeat. We don't want to fill in the gaps or finish their sentences. Like we mentioned before, when we spoke about the different types of learners and different types of engagement in our classroom, some learners take a little bit longer to absorb the information, and some learners take a little bit longer to process and put their thoughts together for them to be able to produce the language. So keeping this in mind as a teacher, we want to make sure that some silence is good. We want to make sure that the students have enough time to process, to think, allow them to make their own mistakes. As a teacher, sometimes we can finish their sentence for them, or maybe give them options. Maybe we are too quick to change the structure of the sentence to give them a new option to see if they understand better. I think something I came across while I was doing some research for this webinar was a phrase that says, completing somebody's sentences is like cutting up their food. It's fine to do for them when they are little, but eventually they need to learn to do it by themselves. And so this is going to be the same thing that we can adopt in the classroom. It's very well and good to help your student, to prop them up a little bit, to fill in an extra word here and there. And that's all very well and good when they're in the beginning stages, when they're learning, but eventually they will need to learn how to do it themselves. So do not be afraid of silence, okay? Do not be afraid of silence. Embrace it a little bit. Give your students the time to reflect. Give your students the time to think, and give your students the time to add on a little bit after they may have finished their point. I myself am guilty of this, of interjecting myself a little bit too early and end up cutting across the student, or we both speak at the same time, and I have to make sure that I allow them the time to continue speaking and to produce as much as possible. Remember when I spoke about word vomit earlier? The teachers, so it's us that we want to reduce the word vomit. If your student is having word vomit in English, fantastic. Let them speak as much as possible. So another thing to think about then, when we're just thinking in general as a class of things that we should or shouldn't say, is don't be a police to your students. Don't be really, really strict on them. Yes, we are here to teach, but we are here to create an encouraging environment for our students to be in. And most of the time, like I said, especially online, your students are doing these supplementary classes as well. So, they may have a lot on their plate. So we want to keep these classes fun and entertaining and engaging, right? We don't want our students to be scared of us. We don't want our students to feel heavily under pressure, especially, there are a lot of different education systems in different countries. And so some public education systems may have a lot of stress on the students. And so we want to keep our extracurricular, our English classes, super fun, super light, and a really enjoyable way to learn. So when we are correcting our students, or when we are thinking about correcting our students, we have to think about a couple of different things. Obviously, we need to think about not just what we're saying, but how we're saying it. Tone of voice is such a big thing. We want to make sure that we're giving constructive feedback to our students. We don't want to put them down. We want to try and bring them up. We don't want to stop them after every single little mistake, because that's really going to demoralize them. It's really going to stop their flow. It might really affect their confidence. So we want to look at their overall performance, maybe make some notes, and then we can do some corrections towards the end of the lesson, or maybe you can give some homework. So we want to try and create, like I said before, an encouraging environment. So when we are giving our students feedback, and when we are trying to give them corrections, we want to try and do this in a friendly way and in an encouraging way as well. So these are kind of things that we're looking at, or that we're thinking about when we're just talking in the classroom in general. We're thinking about our tone of voice. We're thinking about how much language we're using. Is it necessary? How long or short are our sentences? all of these kind of things. But then what about when we get to sensitive topics or sensitive issues? What do we do here? So I think this is a very interesting conversation. Obviously, the topics that I'm going to list here are just some general sensitive topics. This list can be as long as or as short. I think also, people are going to have different opinions about what is a sensitive topic, what isn't a taboo topic. And of course, these are going to change depending on what location you're in and stuff as well. So for the purpose of this webinar, I just listed a few here. And we're talking about things like religion, gender, politics, sex, relationships, civil or human rights, historical conflicts maybe, vaccinations, your opinion on vaccinations. There are a lot of different issues that people can consider to be sensitive or people might not be comfortable talking about, especially within a classroom environment or especially in a second language, because obviously there's a little bit more chance of being misunderstood if you can't clearly express your opinion. So when we're looking or talking or have these sensitive issues within our classroom environment, what do we need to think about? How are we going to approach them? These are some things that we need to think about. Obviously, the first one is going to be the age of your student and the size of your class. So, of course, if you have quite young students, you're not exactly going to have very controversial topics with them because you're going to be doing quite simple, quite basic vocabulary words and grammar and sentence structure. And then the older you get, you may have more sensitive issues that comes about in your coursework. Again, for those of us who are teaching in a school or on an online platform, this may not be an issue for you because some of these topics, as just a general rule of thumb, may not be included in the learning material. As a teacher, sometimes you may not have a choice. They will be included, like I said, depending on the level of the student. And then if we are self-employed, we have to be aware of some topics that we can kind of delve into and the ones that we are best to steer away from. Like I said, this will depend on the age of your student. So there may be some topics that might not be suitable for 15 or 14-year-old students, but if your students are in their 20s or their 30s, you will be able to have a mature conversation. Another thing to think about in this aspect is the size of your group class as well. Sometimes it might be easier to have a lesson on a sensitive issue if there is a smaller class number, because this way it's easier to ensure that people get heard, that people understand everybody else's opinion, and that when you leave the class that all of the students are on the same page, that nobody feels offended or annoyed or anything like this. If you have a bigger class environment with quite a lot of students, it gets a little bit more difficult. Another thing we need to think about then in terms of these topics and when they come up in class is location. The location and the environment of your students. Where are they from? Where are they living? If you know anything about their experiences, their culture, their political environment that they're living in right now, we have to think about all of these different things. And again, James will go through culture with you a little bit more after this. And the biggest thing then is obviously just to be respectful and to create a respectful environment. And this just comes down as a whole. This is what we're trying to do anyway within our classroom, to create an encouraging, safe and respectful learning environment that your students feel comfortable in and feel happy in. So I'm going to hand over to James now, and James is going to talk in a little bit more detail with you guys in terms of the sensitive issues and how we can tackle these within the classroom environment. So I am just going to unshare my screen and head back and hand my James, I don't see you on the oh, here he is. I got him.
Still
So
very faint.
I'll recap. I'm sorry. What I was saying was that sometimes students are the ones that will bring up sensitive topics that you may want to stay away from. Okay. And that being the case, what you want to do is do like Neo in Matrix, I mean, dodge the bullet. And if they insist, because sometimes they will insist, you basically want to tell them, I mean, without, losing your cordiality and without being rude, of course, and without being intimidating, in a very polite way, explain to them that it is inappropriate to discuss, certain topics in class. That, I mean, they could be discussed, in a different environment, in a different scenario, but not in the class. Okay? All right. Now, another thing that Kara mentioned that you need to be very aware of is cultural differences. Now, if you look at this illustration, we have a gentleman, stretching his hand. He's probably a Westerner, and you have an Asian man, offering, his business cards with both his hands, and he's like, "What do I do now? Do I bow? Do I not bow? Do I take the business card? Do I shake his hands?" This other woman, feels that the other man is unfriendly, and he feels like his personal space, is being invaded. For Americans, I mean, we don't like people, getting too close to us. And in some cultures, like in Italy, people would basically just jump at your face. They're very friendly. So these are things that you need to research on when you're going to be working with different cultures. If you're going to be working with Islamic cultures, or Muslim cultures, you may want to be careful with the type of material or the audiovisual material that you're going to use in your class. You don't want to be showing videos of the beach with people in bikinis, for example, or women showing their bodies. I mean, for you and I, that might seem perfectly understandable. For them, it's almost like showing them pornography. You also have to understand that if you work, for example, with Latin Americans, Colombians, Ecuadorians, Peruvians, and this and that, they're very easygoing and they like to play around a lot and they're very humorous. So this might come across to you as them being rude, but that's just their nature. That's just, the way we are because I'm half Colombian myself. Um, or if you're working, with some Asian cultures, then you'll notice that your students are very shy and they're very quiet. Sometimes they'll even cover their mouth, to speak. So all of these things you have to be aware of. I remember once in Micronesia, I went into a store, and I asked the lady, I said, "Do you have Coca-Cola?" And she just basically raised her eyebrows. And I was like, "Sorry, do you have Coca-Cola?" And she raised her eyebrows again. And little did I know that that means yes. That's like shaking your head. So, I mean, all of these things you need to be aware of. So, my suggestion is when you're dealing with different cultures, off the bat, you stay off the topics that Kara mentioned earlier. And another topic you may want to stay away from is holidays. Holidays are different around the world. Some people may not understand the nature of the holidays. In some countries, certain holidays might even be offensive. You have some Latin American countries where Columbus Day is more of an insult than, a celebration of the discovery of America. And they might get sensitive about this. So, I mean, keep an eye out for these things, all right? Okie dokie. Now, what you need to teach your students is leave emotions and beliefs out of the discussion. Now, this is something that I'm very emphatic with my students when they start taking things personally or they start getting, agitated about some topic of discussion that we have in the class, because no matter how careful you are, it's like walking through a minefield. I mean, eventually you're going to step on one and eventually it's going to blow. So many a times, what is best to do is just tell your students to chill. Remember, this is a space for learning English. Sometimes your students may have maybe personal problems. I had a situation in which I was teaching a class, and I decided to, I mean, work with this song. And as I played the song, one of the girls started crying hysterically. And I was a little bit confused, so I allowed her to excuse herself. Later on, I found out that her boyfriend had just broken up with her, and that was their song. So I mean, how do you deal with something like that? So so eventually, I spoke to her, and I told no problem. I understand. So sometimes it's unavoidable, but most of the time, you need to remind your students, to take a very objective posture to whatever it is that you're discussing in class, whatever it is that you guys, whatever the topic may be that you guys are dealing with. All right? Okie dokie. And then, most importantly, you need to establish rules in the class. All right? From the get-go, from day one, you need to establish, the rules of the game. And one of the things that I'm always very emphatic about is I will not allow personal attacks from one student to another. I mean, this is something that you want to be very clear on, especially with Latin American students. I mean, they tend to joke around and they need to, I mean, go over the edge sometimes. And they might even go, in the terrain of bullying, or maybe just, I mean, for the fun of it, making somebody feel bad. So, or making fun of a peer's pronunciation, for example. So this is the type of thing that you need to, I mean, be very careful with, and do not allow, because you don't want, I mean, students to begin to feel uncomfortable, or students, I mean, basically just dropping out of class because they don't feel comfortable with their peers. Now, one thing that I maintain a zero tolerance, and I mean zero tolerance, and that may seem, a little bit drastic, but there's no other way, is homophobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, or any type, of cultural, sexual, or religious bias. And I always make my students understand, that number one, I mean, we do not discuss these topics, and number two, we respect. Okay, like Kara said very emphatically, we always respect. Now, I also ask my students to understand that as part of their learning process of English, is understanding that we are all part, of a global village, that we all belong, to a bigger world, and we need to be open to other people's beliefs and examine our own beliefs. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that I'm going to start changing my mind or changing my beliefs, but basically, again, going along the lines of respect. So, set up these rules, and you'll be fine. And finally, ask students to remain open to multiple perspectives. And this is something that whether I'm teaching online or I'm teaching face to face, I will always, 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 either write these things on the board, or, I'll put them on screen, and I'll discuss them with my students before we even begin the process, of their classes, and make sure that we are in agreement. That way, if the ground rules have been established from the get-go, from the very beginning, then evidently, I mean, you will have no issues. Okay. Now, we spoke about asking students to keep it cool, to chill, not to get emotional about certain things, not to feel attacked or offended in any way. And what about us? As teachers, sometimes we'll be challenged with positions where we'll literally just want to shout at a student, I mean, where they might make us angry, or they might get, under our skin, or they might just, I mean, drive us crazy, drive us nuts. And I'm not talking only about children. Adults can be pretty annoying too if they want to. So above all, keep your head. You're the teacher. You're the role model. Remember that you cannot snap back at a student. You have to be very careful with the emotions. I mean, I've always said that a word said is like an arrow launched. Once it's launched, you cannot take it back. And you may want to be very careful with that. All right. You need to recognize your biases. We're human beings. Okay. Some teachers may be homophobic. Some teachers may be xenophobic. That's a personal right. I'm going to question that. but keep that outside of the classroom. Some teachers may be Islamophobic. Some teachers may even be a little bit racist. You need to understand your biases. You need to be honest with yourself, what makes you uncomfortable, and you need to keep reminding yourself that you cannot bring this into the classroom environment because you're going to be dealing with people from all walks of life. I don't feel very comfortable when students have like excessive piercing on their faces, for example. I don't know why it makes me uneasy. It's not a phobia. It's more like, doesn't that hurt? I mean, it just bothers me. But it's the right of personal expression. If I have a student that has 1,000 piercings on his face, and it's happened to me, you know, I need to deal with that, and I need to basically keep it out of the equation. I am aware that this makes me feel uncomfortable, and by being aware that this makes me feel uncomfortable, then I can deal with it better. And this is something that you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with to say or not to say? Well, if you let your biases, control you, you might say inappropriate things to your students, or you might blurt out inappropriate comments, because emotions can be tricky and emotions can be treacherous. Breathe. Sometimes students will really annoy you. Sometimes, I mean, you will basically want to put your hands, around their necks, like Homer Simpson with Bart, you little demon. But of course, you cannot do that, and you cannot express that in your body language. Even if you try to smile, if your face is turning red and steam is coming out of your ears, students will know, and students have a funny reaction. The more upset you are, the more they'll keep pressing your buttons. It's like a little game, Oh, I get it. Man, I know how to, I know how to get him. Breathe, count to 10. Take a deep breath, smile, and again, careful. The brain mouth filter thing, keep it always on. All right? Be careful with what you're saying. You need to be a role model. You are a teacher, and teachers always have to maintain their cool. You are the teacher. You are educating people. You are human, yes, but you are the professional. Always be a role model in the way you dress, in the way you present yourself to the students, in the way that you speak, in the body language, in your demeanor, in being respectful, in being assertive, in being proactive. I mean, this is very important, all right? Keep your distance. It's going to engage with students, and it's going to create a certain type of engagement with them in the sense that, yes, I mean, they need to feel that you care about their processes and this and that, but do not get personal with students. That's a no-no. That's the number one rule. That will also affect what you say in class, and it will also affect your demeanor in class, and other students will pick up on it. If you develop certain, personal relationships with students, whether we're talking friendly or romantic, I mean, let's say it out the way it is, this will become evident, and this will affect the way that you perform in class and the way that you speak to your students. All right? Prepare. We spoke about cultural differences. Well, if you're going to teach, children from Korea, read up on children from Korea. Find out what makes them comfortable. Find out what makes them uncomfortable. Find out about their body language. Some things may seem awkward to you when you're teaching them, and if you read up on the culture, you understand the culture a little better, then you'll be fine. When I was watching Kara doing her demonstration in Mandarin or Cantonese or Chinese, let's call it, I smiled because I remember my first, interaction with Chinese people, and they speak so fast. I can't speak Chinese like Kara does, but it shocked me. You know, it was weird. I didn't understand the culture. I mean, once you understand it, then it's fine. And finally, always be proactive. Always be proactive. I mean, don't be one of these people that finds a problem for every solution. I have a lot of friends like that, friends, and I quote, and I know a lot of people like that whatever solution you find, they'll find a problem with it. Be the opposite. If problems arise in the classroom, inappropriate topics come up, I mean, something happens, be very proactive, be very cool, be very propositive.